think we will make a start. It is all going to be recorded, so anyone who joins late can access the full recording afterwards. Thanks everybody for joining the St John's Chambers Pupillage webinar, which I hope is going to assist you with upcoming applications in the not so distant future. As I said, this is going to be recorded. A link should go out to whatever email address you registered with after the event, and I think it's also going to be put up on our website as well. I would be extremely grateful if at the end of this you take a couple of minutes to answer a questionnaire that's going to pop up, because that's how we figure out if these sorts of things are helpful to you, what in particular works, what doesn't work, that sort of thing. So please do stick around for a few minutes at the end to fill that out. I think without further ado, we will crack on. I'll start with me, given that I'm the one talking. I'm Brittany Pearce. I'm a member of the Chancery and Commercial team here at St John's Chambers, although I specialise just in Chancery. I'm also the head of Pupillage, and I will go through the panellists as they appear in front of me. Georgina.
Hello everyone, my name is Georgina Swinglehurst. I'm in the family team at St John's and I specialise in matrimonial finance and private children law. I suppose in terms of, Brittany, do you want us to slightly talk about our route to the bar, or do you want to do that after?
No, go for it.
Okay, so I came to the bar a little bit later. I did classics at university in Bristol, and then I actually had another career in something entirely different first, in sport. I essentially then came to the bar a bit later. I decided I loved what I did, but I didn't want to do that forever. So I did the conversion course, the GDL, I did that in Bristol, and then I did the bar course in London. And I decided that I wanted to do a bit of paralegal experience before I applied for pupillage. So I paralegaled in London for a couple of years before I decided that I wanted to come back to Bristol to do pupillage. So I did my pupillage at St John's, and I've been a tenant now for, I'll be in my second year. So that's sort of how I got here.
Thanks. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Simon Rhodes. I'm the Chief Executive and responsible for the business side of Chambers. I used to be, in a former life, a solicitor who appeared opposite barristers and instructed barristers, which is a sort of helpful background, but it's the business side that I'm particularly involved with.
Thanks. And Fran?
Hello, my name's Fran D'Argenio. I'm the pupil in the Commercial and Chancery team this year. I also came to the bar a little bit later. I did an undergraduate degree in English and a master's in English, and I had a career in marketing, I suppose you would call it, in a college. And after a couple of years, I decided to retrain in law. It's something I'd always been interested in. So I did the GDL in Bristol and the bar course in Bristol. And I got pupillage while I was on the bar course. And for the past year, I was working as a paralegal in Bristol as well. And I started pupillage in October.
Thanks, Fran. Beatrice.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beatrice. I'm a member of our personal injury, clinical negligence and inquests team. I did pupillage at St John's, same cohort as Georgina, so coming into my second year of tenancy. Compared to the paths of our first two members of Chambers, I did a different one. I came direct, so I did a degree at Newcastle Uni, the bar course in London, and then got started at St John's.
And Daniel.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Daniel. I'm a member of the Chancery and Commercial team here at St John's. I specialise in property and probate work now. I've been a tenant for about 5 years, and my route to the bar, I did a law degree and I did the bar course here in Bristol at UWE, and then I worked a few different jobs for a few years after that before getting my pupillage here. I did a couple of different things, like I worked for a construction law firm dealing in disputes, construction disputes. I did some advocacy work for LPC Law, and I worked for Bristol City Council in their commercial legal team for a bit.
Thanks. Last but not least, Adam.
Well, my name is Adam. I'm the senior clerk for the personal injury and clinical negligence teams at St John's. I've been at St John's for almost 18 years now and have seen many a cohort of pupils come through, and hopefully have played some positive role in their development and ultimately successful practices.
So that's our panel group for you. You've got a range from sort of current pupils right up to CEO and Adam, who's been there, I think, longer than any of us by far. We've brought together a group of people to sort of assist you and give different insights into the pupillage process, the different stages of the applications, and also what pupillage itself can be like. Broadly, the structure we're going to follow, so it's pretty informal, but we're going to sort of broadly discuss pre-application things that you can be doing, the applications themselves, the interviews, what pupillage itself is like. I'm going to springboard off of a lot of the questions that have already been sent in. We do have a Q&A box that I can see already has questions in it at the bottom, so do feel free to tap away into that, and we'll try and reach most of those questions as well as we're going through. Something I'd flag right at the start is that we've got a pupillage policy on our website, and if you're making an application to us and you're wanting more detail about the process and to really sort of drill down into the nitty-gritty, that is your answer. Go and have a look at that. I'm not going to sit here and read it out because we would be here for a very long time. I'm pretty proud of that document. We're very transparent about the process that we go through for recruitment, and that'll answer a lot of the questions that you might have. So I highly recommend having a Google, finding it and giving it a read. I think we'll start off with the pre-application side of things. Obviously, when you're going through and you're applying for pupillages, you've got decisions about whether or not you're going employed or self-employed. You've got decisions about whether you're going to have a mixed practice or you're going to be applying to somewhere with a specialist practice. Here at St John's, we do specialist pupillages, but that's not always the case. I think it might be quite helpful to hear from people about how they knew sort of what area of law they wanted to do, and also that they wanted to do have a specialist practice rather than more general mixed common practice. Beatrice, views?
Sure. I was slightly unusual on this in that I wasn't really sure. I knew that personal injury and clinical negligence was the area that I found most interesting from modules at uni and also from work experience that I'd done. I also knew that I ultimately always wanted to specialise in it, was unsure whether I wanted to do that from the outset or not. So I did some both applications. I did some for common law pupillages and I did some for specialist. All my specialist ones were for PI and Clin Neg, and decided that by the end of the process, because it's a really hard decision to make and it's a decision that you're making ultimately for the rest of your career, hoped that by the end of the pupillage process I'd have gained more insight as to which route I wanted to go. And going through the application processes, it became abundantly clear to me that any of the exercises that I did in PI and Clin Neg I clearly was far more interested in, that I thought actually I'm not sure why, I just want to sort of stay broader and it'd be better to specialise sooner. I also think it's really difficult when you are coming to the bar and doing pupillage and getting on your feet, that the idea of having to be an expert in so many subjects was quite daunting to me, that I thought actually the opportunity to just specialise and really nail down on the expertise in those areas I'd prefer to do. So that was really how I made the decision, but I kept it open. It wasn't one I made from the outset.
Was anyone else sort of more sure right from the outset about what area they were going into?
I was quite sure from the outset. So I was sort of the opposite to Beatrice, that I had done volunteer experience for something called the Personal Support Unit, which was in Bristol, and I'd seen a lot of family law doing that. Loved it, knew I wanted to do that, paralegal specifically in family. And so for me, the idea of being able to do a specialised pupillage, knowing what I wanted to do, was far more appealing than having to sort of go and learn lots of different areas when I knew where I wanted to end up. What I will say though is I think the pupillages, even in the specific practice areas, are still quite broad. So in family, there are you would still do the three main areas. So you would do matrimonial finance, private children, and also public children, so care. They're actually all very different areas in and of themselves. So if the idea that it's too specialized is something that would worry you, I don't actually agree with that. And I know it's the same with the other areas, that there's so many areas within the bracket that you'll be doing in your specialism. So I think it's sort of the best of both worlds. And I've chosen to sort of specialize just in what I'd paralegaled in, so finance and public private children. So you have the ability to do that and really shape your practice how you want it to be at St John's.
I think that's right. And Dan, I know that you don't do full Chancery commercial. I think you're more along the, well, you can say what you do. For my part, I'm really just Chancery. I don't do commercial. I do Chancery, and even within that, I am only really real property. So I've honed down my specialism about as far as I can. You've specialised quite a lot as well, Dan, haven't you?
Yeah, so I definitely started out doing the broad range of Chancery commercial, doing property, probate, commercial work, and I'm definitely starting to focus more on property and probate as the two areas that I'm taking forward. I can't see myself not doing either one of those for the time being, but maybe a time will come when I choose to focus on one. But for now, that's where I'm at.
Something else we've been asked quite a lot about is mini pupillages. Are they necessary? How do they help? Things like that. How many did people do? I might throw that open to the panel. Fran, how many did you do?
I did probably more than is recommended normally. I think I did 6, although I did one of those quite a long time ago before my first career. So whether you count that or not, but either way, 5 is still probably quite a lot. And I think most people, if you speak to them, will recommend you do something like 2 or 3. But I found it quite helpful to do more because I wasn't sure what area of law I wanted to practice in. And coming from another career and making the decision to convert into law, I really wanted to be certain of what I was doing. I also found it was very helpful for me to see lots of different areas of law, which I might not have been able to do with just 2 or 3. In fact, I wouldn't have been able to. It also gave me lots to speak about on my pupillage applications. And you don't actually have to disclose all of them. If you do way too many, you don't have to necessarily disclose all of them on your applications if you have flexibility and you're doing non-gateway applications. I did find them all helpful, sort of cumulatively. I would say try not to do too many during the bar course. The teaching is very fast-paced and you'll find it hard to catch up on the content you've missed if you sort of take too much time out. So if you're in the stages of doing your degree, your undergraduate degree or your conversion at the moment, or even before that, that's probably a good time to start. Another thing is that many pupillages are competitive in and of themselves. So you might end up applying to more, throwing your net out wide, thinking you might only get a couple and getting more back than you expect. So I would say take all the opportunities you can get to experience what you can, as long as you can fit it in with your schedule, and then make them sort of use them as you need on your applications.
Does anyone think that we see successful applications that don't have any minis on them? I think they're pretty crucial, or at least if you don't have them, you need to be able to explain very cogently why you have been unable to undertake a mini. Anyone want to fight me on that and say that they don't think they're particularly important to applications?
I'm not going to fight you on it, Brittany. I agree. I think, but I think they're important not as a sort of tick box exercise, in that, not to say that each mini you do strengthens your application, I think the way that they strengthen your application is that they give you a way to talk about and answer the questions. Why do you want to do this particular area of law, or why do you want to become a barrister? And if you haven't done any minis and you haven't experienced what life as a barrister is like by doing a mini, and you haven't experienced what an area of law is like for a barrister, because practicing in an area of law as a barrister can be very different to studying it academically, for example. So just because you liked commercial law at the university doesn't necessarily mean you'll like it in practice, and vice versa. So I think it's really important that you have minis so that you can persuasively answer a question. You know, why do you want to be a barrister, or what is it about being a barrister that you think you might enjoy, or why do you want to do this area of law? The minis will help you to be able to answer those questions.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up our Q&A thing here. The question is, how do we talk about minis that we've done at other chambers for the benefit of our application if we haven't done a mini with St John's? We don't need you to have done a mini with St John's. Most chambers, I think, I did my pupillage at Guildhall Chambers in Bristol. I hadn't done a mini pupillage with Guildhall. I had in fact done one with St John's, but we don't expect, when we're marking pupillage applications, you don't get extra points for having done a mini pupillage with St John's at all. We expect people to have done mini pupillages with other chambers. Usually, Fran says that she did quite a lot with 6. I did about 18, 20, 22. I went deep into maritime, intellectual property. I explored all of the areas of law to figure out what I wanted to do, and I only ever referenced 3 in my application, because all that was relevant to an application for a specialist Chancery pupillage were the specialist Chancery mini pupillages that I had done. So that really, the minis for me were crucial in helping me narrow down what area of law I actually wanted to practice in. I don't practice in Chancery because I thought land law on the GDL was amazing fun. I'm not sure I thought that at all, but I did find that the problems and conferences and sort of issues that barristers I was shadowing were dealing with were quite interesting. And I really liked the paper-based practice. I didn't want to go to court every day, and I learned about what sort of practice I wanted from those minis. So I hope that helps sort of explain to people why that they are quite important, but you really don't need to go overboard with them. It's enough to show that you understand the job. This is why you're interested in the area, sort of thing. As far as minis at St John's, yes, we offer them. Go and have a look at the website, is the short answer.
Brittany,
what-
Should
Go
just
on,
come to that. I can see that there's a question about showing commitment to Bristol, which probably relates, even if you haven't done a mini pupillage at St John's, if you have done one in Bristol, but you aren't local to Bristol, that can be a good way to demonstrate or answer the question as to why actually you think this is a city which you could see yourself practicing in.
Sure, that's a good point as well. I've got a note to later on talk a bit more about showing commitment, because I know that comes up a lot in these sorts of webinars. Is there anything else before we dive into look at the sort of the application? Is there anything else? What do we expect people to have done by the time they're applying?
Brittany, can I just cover off the mini pupillage point, because I think we've had yourself and Fran have both said you did quite a lot of minis. I think it's important that people don't think that you have to have that amount, and I think it is about quality, not quantity, with so much of what you're putting on your application. I'd only done about 2 or 3, and I think bearing in mind at the time I was doing minis, I was in employed work, so taking time off to do minis, I was using it as annual leave. So there is a reality to it, and I don't want people to think that if you can't take the time or can't afford to be doing lots of minis, that's a block to it, because it's absolutely not. I did 2 or 3. I also did other things like voluntary work, as I've already mentioned, and I did marshalling. And I think marshalling, I mean, I thought that was as beneficial, if not more beneficial, than some of the minis that I did. So there are other avenues, and you can marshal for a day. It doesn't have to be a 5-day mini pupillage to help you get that experience. So don't panic if you're applying without lots of minis on your application and haven't done that, because as long as you've got other things and other experiences to talk about and explain why you like the area or why perhaps you don't like an area that you've seen. I think that's the key point from doing them. It's not, as Dan said, just a tick box exercise.
100%. It's not more minis equals more points on your application. It's not that at all. It is exactly as Georgina says about sort of, you've got a couple there that you talk about, and you can also show your evidence in a number of other ways. And that could be through paid work, unpaid work. It might be through further study. There's various ways of doing that. That sort of leads us to...
Sorry, can I just add one bit to that, which is you asked the question, what about a wider thought as to what you might need to have sort of in your locker, if you like, at the point where you're applying? From Chambers' perspective, in other words, the sort of business perspective, is because you're going to be self-employed and you're going to have to run your own practice. I think it's always advantageous if anybody's had any business experience or other skills to show you can adapt from something else. If you've had experience of other jobs and other roles, I think that helps as a general idea, because I think it means you're probably more adaptable to what is a practice that requires quite a lot of adaptation. So if you've done it before and you've had a bit of business experience, I think that's generally very helpful for you.
Agreed. I'm mindful on time, so I will sort of briefly give a headline that I think other things that are important include sort of demonstrating a degree of advocacy quite often. It's a big part of the job. So it might be that you've done some mooting. It might be that you've done some debating. It might be public speaking. It might be that you're coming from a previous career and that you would have to have given a series of presentations. So there's various ways of demonstrating that, but I think that can also be an important thing to show as well. Any views from other people about what they did to make their application stand out?
Perhaps if you've got experience with people in any way, quite often in this job, and I think I'm talking on behalf of all of the practice areas, you meet people who are at crisis point when you're at court with them. Something has gone wrong, usually, which is why they need a barrister to come in. So any transferable skills of dealing with people in customer-facing roles or perhaps voluntary roles, all of that's really helpful.
Agreed. And that also can sometimes roles that help show that you've got time management skills as well, given the fact that with being self-employed, you are going to be managing your own practice. So it's always helpful to be able to demonstrate that you can manage workloads, juggle priorities, and that might not come from a job. That might be something to do with your university studies. It might be to do with voluntary work. Again, so there's various ways of showing these sort of competencies. I'll move us into the applications themselves. Right now, the applications, the advertisements are all live on the Pupillage Gateway. Applications open January 2nd. They'll close February 6th. That's when we will start marking with our army of volunteers. And then usually in about early March, we inform candidates whether they're being invited to first round interviews. I think last year we got about 150 applications, and off the top of my head, we invited 18, 20 people or so to first round interviews. And then we whittled that down, and we generally invite about a third of those people back for second round interviews. You can get all of the dates on the Gateway. We're not ourselves on the Gateway, but everybody has to advertise there. So you'll find all advertisements on there. And sort of the application form is on our website. As far as who we want to see applications from, I think this is quite an important thing to cover off. Sort of, Simon, I might hand that over to you.
The answer is everyone who's qualified to make an application from all backgrounds, because ultimately we want to be diverse and equal chambers, but we also, for commercial reasons, want to offer client choice. We want strength in depth, and we want to be able to grow. So good candidates from wherever, with whatever backgrounds, whatever you've done before, everybody's welcome.
That's it. There isn't a barrister look or type, and we're not looking to be an identikit sort of chambers.
No.
Who everybody looks and thinks and sounds the same. That sounds very dull. I mean, I think we've got a fairly diverse range of backgrounds. I'm state school from, I wasn't born in the UK, but when I came to the UK, I was state school. I'm first to go to university on one side of my family. Yes, it was Oxford. I read PPE. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do as a job. I am, but slightly different in that I am absolutely riddled in tattoos. I live for the outdoors. I live in Scotland on the Isle of Skye. I pop down to Bristol when I need to go to court every 2 months. I spend huge chunks of my year out in Southern Africa, which is my home, and I live in a tent and practice tracking most of the time. So for me, the bar is a small and important, but sort of small part of my life, and I know that that's very different to sort of other backgrounds and things like that. What else have we got on this panel? Have we got any other state school? We've got a fair few non-Oxbridge, haven't we? Daniel, you're raising your hand.
Just raising as another state school attendee. I went to university up in Durham. Yeah, that's my background.
Fran?
I also went to state school. I had free school meals when I was at school. I lived in a council house most of my life. So definitely not all sort of private school backgrounds here by quite a long way. So if anyone has any questions about that and what that's like, you're very welcome to address them to me.
Yeah, I hope that sort of reassures people that there isn't a type, there isn't a fit. I know that a question we got ahead of the webinar was whether or not we welcomed applications from mature candidates. The answer is absolutely. I know a fair few people who have transferred to the bar from other careers. And you've heard say that not everybody has come directly to the bar. And I often find, if I think about the sort of applications that I've marked in the 9 years or so that I've been marking applications, often those who have had a different career first find themselves in a very strong place when it comes to applications, because they can generally point to this absolute wealth of experience to demonstrate positions of responsibility, problem solving, time management. They can be very clear about what it is that is attracting them to the bar rather than to something else. So I think that, right, absolutely, mature candidates are invited to apply, and I think that you'd be quite often in a very good position with that. I should say that when we mark application forms, you're given a number. You don't have a name when we mark your application, because we anonymize as much as we can. So when an application comes in, there's a front page which you'll have filled out with your sort of name and address and school you went to and the university you went to and things like that. That is taken away when we're first marking the applications. So when I'm looking at an application, I can see the degree grade, the classification that you got, but I've got no idea what university you went to. So we anonymize as much as possible at that initial stage. And the purpose of that is to remove any unconscious bias that there might be. And I think that's quite an important thing to do. And I'm really proud that we do that as part of Chambers. The applications, academics, I think is important to talk about. Grades are important. It's a pretty academic job, but they are a small part of our scoring system. It's not as if you've got a first, you're bound to succeed and be invited to first or second round interviews. I don't have a first, I've got a 2-1, and actually if you drill down into my 2-1, it wasn't that far off being a 2-2 because I spent my time at university engaged in non-academic pursuits, mostly in the pub. So it's not I must have a first. The minimum we ask for is a 2-2, and if you've got an extenuating circumstances, put that down. There is a box for extenuating circumstances, because quite often, for instance, if you have a 2-2 with extenuating circumstances, it's going to be treated as if it were a 2-1. Does anyone on the panel have a master's?
I do as well, but not in law.
There we go. Did you find it particularly helpful for your applications?
I mean, I think perhaps a bit different for me because I had a career like after my degrees. So, I mean, what I can say is I don't think I was asked any questions about minis or law. Everyone was much more interested in real life experience. And I think what Beatrice was talking about, having transferable skills, I think that's something that's really important for people to realise, that it's not all about having a wealth of legal experience, as long as you've got some examples of how you've developed those skills and can apply that in the future to being a barrister.
You've got one as well, Fran, I think you said.
Yes, I've got a master's, which is also non-legal. It was in medieval literature. So not many directly transferable concepts, but lots of transferable skills, independent research, and also just gives me something non-legal to talk about that I think is quite interesting and that I'm passionate about. So that was helpful in the course of my applications as well. But I would say the thing to consider in terms of masters is if you're doing an undergraduate degree that's non-legal and you're considering doing the GDL and the bar course afterwards, if you choose to do a master's, you'll use up your master's funding from the government, which won't then be available to you to do the bar course. So I had to self-fund through the bar course and through the GDL, and did so with the help of scholarships. I definitely didn't pay for it all myself. But yeah, just bear that in mind if you're thinking, shall I do, a master's in my undergraduate subject or shall I not? Something to think about is funding.
Yeah, I'd definitely add, from a marking point of view, that if you've got a master's, at most it's only going to add 1 point in our scoring system. We've got a lot about our scoring system online, but at most you're only going to get 1 extra point. So if it's something you're thinking of doing because you are interested in it, awesome. Do it. If that's what you want to do and you want to study further, I'm all for it. I know that some people sometimes think that they ought to do a master's because it will improve the prospects of their application. That I'd really push back against, because yes, you might get 1 more point here, but if you're already at the maximum number of academic points, you're not going to get any further, and you could pick up so many more points elsewhere in the application by spending that time as a county court advocate or as a paralegal, or working and obtaining the experience even in a non-law role that you can then talk about to demonstrate the competencies. So I don't think it's necessarily something that always adds to an application. It's more if it's right for you as a person, that's great, but don't feel it's necessary for part of a sort of successful application. I think I'm going to take us back to this showing an interest in Bristol. If you're not from Bristol, is anyone on the panel not particularly linked to the Southwest?
I mean, I suppose I wasn't at the time. At the time, I was living in London and I'd been there for a while and I'd been working in London. And so I suppose it was something I had to think about. I mean, I went to Bristol University, so maybe that's a bit of a cheat for me. But I was just honest about why I liked the Southwest and why I wanted to come back there. And I think if you are applying to St John's, there should be a reason for it, and that is the reason to put on your application why you want to be in the Southwest at St John's, and that should really cover that off for you if it's something that you're worried about.
Yeah, I think it's something you can cover off pretty easy. I didn't have a strong Bristol connection. I was in Wales, so not far off. And I think when I was applying to Guildhall, when I was applying, you sit there, why do you want to be at that set? Well, I think there's sort of a number of fairly easy answers you can give. You go, okay, well, St John's is a collegiate set. They've won these awards. They've been shortlisted for these awards. They're a set that's ranked in these directories for these things. And I think that's very impressive. And I want to be at a set that's as strong as this. Great, you've just scored really well in points. I don't think that, so you don't need to have lived in the Southwest. You don't even need to have stepped foot in the Southwest. You just really need to be able to give a cogent answer about why you like St John's. And I think the key, when people do poorly on these answers of the applications I've seen, it's usually because they've copied and pasted from an application that they've sent to some other corner of the country. I really want to come to your chambers because I'm so passionate about the culture in Manchester. I've seen that. I'm not thinking that most people won't just apply to sets in a particular city. You might be applying to a number. I did a couple. I think I mooted some applications over in London. So really, I think this is more one where it's, if you're going to lose points, it's probably because of something like a copy and paste answer from a different corner of the country, rather than being a question where there is a magic formulaic sort of set of words that unlocks the points here. It's just the answer to what if someone said, what's so good about that place? That's your response. Does anyone else here mark applications? Daniel, what are some of the sort of do's and don'ts as far as you're concerned when it comes to applications?
Well, I think one of the things, the other thing about having a connection, or maybe some sort of connection to Bristol, is we want to know that you are coming to Bristol, coming to St John's with the intention of making a career here. And part of the job of the application is to persuade us that you're not just coming to maybe do pupillage and then move somewhere else. So anything you can do to persuade us of that is also, I think, a benefit in an application. But in terms of written applications, I think we're just looking for you to make the most of the experience that you've got and the achievements that you've got. So like everyone else has been saying, really applying it to the skills that you are going to need as a barrister. So being able to pick up on skills in non-legal jobs that you've done in the past, for example, that you think are transferable, that's really important, because we know not everyone will have lots of legal experience before coming to the bar. So it's about picking up those skills that you've done in other work and in other experience that you can highlight and explain why they would help you in a career at the bar.
Yeah, I'd agree. I've spent, before I was head of pupillage, I spent a long time marking applications. I pretty much started marking applications as soon as I was a tenant. The best are concise and punchy. When I am mentoring people now, my advice is to say one thing per sentence, and keep it clear. So if you are taking 3 sentences to make a single point, you need to reword that and get it down to 1 sentence. We have word limits. People have a limited time marking your application. You need to be as crystal clear as you can. And equally, some other people go the other way and they try and make too many points within the same sentence, or they try and make the same point 3 times, which doesn't make it 3 times more persuasive an answer. You've got a really short window of time to make an impression on people, make it easy for people to award the points for you. And I generally say that when you're going through and reviewing your answers, ask yourself, what point am I making with this sentence? What is the point of this sentence? Why have I said this? And that can quite often help really hone the answers you're giving and proof your application. a lot of people sort of take it as a given. Don't just proof it on the screen. And this is something that I do with all of my paperwork, is I will type it out, I will review it on my screen, and then I will print it. And I have never failed to make an amendment to something that I have read on paper versus something that I've scrolled through on the screen, because I read things, perhaps it's because I read things very quickly on a screen, or I'm less focused on grammar and style when I'm looking at the screen. But I would say a good half of the applications that I've seen weren't properly proofed. And you do get points for sort of written communication. And if you're not proofing them, they're sort of easy points to lose at that point. I thought there was a good question sent in advance about tips for avoiding brain fog whilst you're making these applications. I didn't go through the gateway process, but I've always recommended that people break things down into small chunks. So it's say, today I'm going to draft the answer to this question, and tomorrow I'm going to draft the answer to this question. Because I think that if you leave it until the day before to try and draft the entire application form, I think that's recipe for a disaster, is putting it too highly, but you're not setting yourself up for the best success. How did other people go about sort of going through making applications?
I'm happy to go. So once I decided where I wanted to apply, the first thing I did was find the criteria for each chambers, which is often published on chambers websites. And where I had those criteria, I noted down what the main things chambers were looking for were, what they suggested their mark schemes might be. So if they're looking for evidence of advocacy, resilience, and written communication skills, for example, I would note that down. Then I would go through all of my work experience and find examples where I demonstrated those skills in any of my work experience, and sort of try and find a really concrete way of showing how I demonstrated those skills. So always using the STAR method, which you might have heard of, and I think that stands for situation, task, actions, results. It's been a little while. I think that's what it is. That always helped me sort of focus my structure, and yeah, made sure I had sort of really tangible examples to answer every question. So I don't know if there's anything more I can add, but I did have a tip for proofing, which was try and read things backwards. So instead of reading, say, an answer from start to finish, read the last sentence first and work backwards by sentence, not backwards by each word. And the reason that helps is because when you read things you've written yourself recently, you sort of have, you think you know what you intend to say. So when you read it, often you gloss over the mistakes or things that don't quite make sense because you're sort of expecting to see something on the paper which might not really be there. But if you read backwards, you take away the sense of what you're saying and you're just seeing the words on the paper. So it can be a really helpful way of spotting any errors you might have made.
I've never heard that one. That's quite interesting one. Who else had their hands stuck up just then? Not Georgina.
Georgie,
Okay.
do you want to go first?
I'm happy to, or you can go first, Daniel. I don't mind. I mean, I think there's a reality to doing these applications that it's a difficult, long process to go through, and we're all aware of that. Obviously, we're all going to say it's worth it when you get there. But I essentially worked. Whenever the deadline was, I said a month before, right, I'm going to start drafting my applications, and I would draft a bit, and then I would go away and I would leave it. So it's sort of a different technique to what Fran is saying. That I would say I'm going to leave that now and go back to it, because then often when you reread it, you think, oh gosh, that's not quite right. But I think the really important thing is when you're putting in a number of applications, what people start to do is they will try and sort of copy and paste an answer to fit into another question. And we can see when that happens. It's really obvious when people have just been sort of copying and copying. So you need to just really think about what the question is asking you and what you actually want to say, because ultimately this is the first time that we are going to see your advocacy. The application is about your persuasive skills, and it is a written advocacy exercise, which is a huge part of what we do. So you need to approach it like that, it's not so much just about what you're saying, but how you're saying it. So really make sure that how you are writing it, you feel represents you and what a good advocate you can be.
Absolutely. Daniel, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's right. And the reason why the copy and paste doesn't work is because, like Fran said, each chambers has slightly different things that they're looking for. So if you copy from one to another, it just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense according to the criteria that we're looking at. So my main recommendation is to do fewer applications. That was the way I did it. I focused more time on fewer applications, and I think that worked for me. But obviously you've got to be brave, because it feels less risky to do more applications. But I think actually if the quality across those applications is less, because you're trying to do so many and you're copying across, then actually that's not the reality. The reality is that it's less risky to do fewer applications and to spend more time on them, doing what Fran suggested and going onto the Chambers websites, figuring out what they're looking for and going through painstakingly through your own experiences and matching the two up. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah. All right, well, let's look at interviews. You've made your application. We've invited the top 10%, 15% or so to interview. So at St John's, again, this is all very detailed in our pupillage policy. Our first round is about 30 minutes. You're sent out a case in advance. I picked a very fun case last year, which I think was a Court of Appeal decision about an unexploded World War II bomb and causation and insurance. And that's sort of sent out in advance, 30 minutes with a panel, and it's going to be a mix of questions about the case that was sent and what we call sort of competency-based questions. So we'll be quizzing you to sort of understand your analytical thinking, your influencing and advocacy skills, your ability to work under pressure, your communication skills, that sort of thing. First rounds with us are generally remote. We will always ensure that there's an in-person offering for people for whom remote interviews don't work. For instance, they might have a poor internet connection, or you might just not have somewhere that's quiet and private. Otherwise, we offer remote interviews because they're generally more accessible for most people. Second round interviews, you're in front of a practice group specific panel of 3, and you will have been set a topical exercise drafted by that practice group and asked to submit a skeleton argument in advance. So you'll have sort of questions on that and on the sort of topical exercise, and then there's also going to be more drilling down into your application, and that's a longer 45-minute interview, and that's done in person. We also do something called that we just call the meet and greet, which is you come out of your second round interview and you're invited to sort of hang about afterwards, if it's not been too terrible an experience, and have sort of tea and coffee and cake with some of our juniors and to discuss all things St John's or pupillage or whatever you like, really. It doesn't form part of the interview at all. Whatever you say to the juniors doesn't get fed back into the interview panel. Really, that's a chance for you to get a feel for us, because quite often the very best applicants are going to have multiple offers on the table, and we want to make sure that we're choosing you, but you are also choosing us. And I think one of the big selling points about St John's is sort of the collegiate atmosphere and how supportive we are. And I think that gives you a really good flavour of it at that point. We're not stuffy. We're a very approachable, fairly interesting, likeable bunch, I think. And something that we do, for instance, with our pupils is that everybody gets assigned a buddy, which is a junior that they can go and speak to about things and any sort of trials and tribulations that they're having with pupillage, and just to go, oh God, this is a really hard week, or I found that really intense. So a friendly ear that they have. But before I get too far into what pupillage is like, Fran, why don't you tell us a bit about your interview experience, given that it will be freshest in your mind?
Yeah, so in terms of St John's specifically, first round interview, remote, as you said, Brittany. And I remember it being quite an intense first round, but, you know, quite fun as well. We were sent a judgment that was from a Scottish case, so an area of law that I don't think anyone would have been naturally familiar with. And we grappled with that a bit in the interview. And there were also some questions about my, you know, when I demonstrated certain skills, and trying to think if I can recall any of them in particular. I remember it being quite fast paced, quite a wide panel, not practice area specific. And then second interview, three members of the commercial and chancery team, and that started with, as you said, an advocacy exercise. So I made an application for relief from sanctions, I believe, submitted a skeleton argument for that a week beforehand. And I enjoyed that one again. Enjoyed having the opportunity to do some advocacy and take it a bit slower as well. There were fewer questions over a longer period of time, so felt like there was more of an in-depth conversation. And yeah, I remember the meet and greet well, because I missed a family wedding. I was drinking coffee, thinking about everyone else at my cousin's wedding, but it was worth it. And yeah, it was really enjoyable. I don't know if I mean, I can talk about how I prepared. So in terms of preparation generally, I compiled the biggest list of potential interview questions I could possibly find. Speaking to sort of mentors I had, friends in years above me who'd already got pupillage, online sources. There are quite a lot of places, quite a lot of websites where you can find pupillage questions. Yeah, compiled an enormous list, and whenever I set aside time to prepare for interviews, I would try and just practice giving an answer to as many of them as I could. The most helpful thing I found is, you know, you can prepare answers, you know, however much time you have, you can fill with preparing your answers. But the thing that's hardest to prepare for is responding to things you don't expect. I think that's one of the hardest things about being in an interview, is that you're thinking on your feet, as it were, and you don't know what's coming next. So the thing I found most helpful was giving that enormous list to a friend or my partner and getting them to pick questions that I wasn't prepared for, or I didn't know what was going to come next, and just drilling me with those questions on car rides or when we were walking the dog, just to see if I could give an answer that I hadn't prepared for already. That's definitely something I would recommend. Yeah, preparing to talk about work experience I'd had, and again, if I knew there was something, I would be an example from a previous experience I was going to be using repeatedly, likely to be using repeatedly. I would make sure I'd practice talking about that one in particular, and vocalizing what I wanted to say, so that I knew it would come out in a sort of cogent way. Trying not to say anything for the first time in the interview unless absolutely necessary, just basically practicing all the time. Trying to think if I have any more tips. Yeah, nothing more specific springs to mind, but if you do have any questions, I've been answering them in the Q&A, so do let me know.
I've just seen that. Thank you, Fran, because there are a huge amount of questions. Does anyone else have hints or tips from their either stuff that they've settled on as an interviewer or that they remember from their
I just add to what Fran said, really, which is there are a huge number of resources out there to support applicants going through the process. Pupillage and How to Get It is a great website which talks through interview questions, interview tips. If you haven't used that website, I'd recommend you have a look at it. If possible, do a mock interview before having your first pupillage interview. There again are a whole manner of places that offer those. If you aren't a student member of an Inn of Court, maybe have a think about whether at this stage you'd like to join one, because most of the Inns of Court offer mock interview schemes, which again are all free and can help candidates through the process. So don't think that you're sort of on your own. You're not. There are a huge number of resources to support people through it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got to echo what Fran says, that some of the questions are going to be pretty predictable. If we've sent you out a case to look at, you should expect to be asked to summarize that case. And the people who tend to get through are sort of, amongst other things, you start with, say, okay, well, tell me about this case. And they can give you a 3-minute summary of the case. If we send you something, it's because we want you to understand it and look at it. You don't need to go and delve into other resources. But there's a lot of stuff that you can prepare for as far as the answers go. So if you're sent a case, what is the case about? What was the decision in the case? What were the main areas of arguments? What was the main argument for? What was the main argument against? I would expect well-prepared answers to those 5 things, because they are fairly obvious questions that you're going to be asked about. Similarly, a lot of the competency-based stuff is pretty easy to predict, especially if you've done as Fran suggested and sort of gone onto the website and said, okay, well, what sort of qualities are they looking for? It's not a surprise to be asked, tell us about a time you've had to demonstrate time management, or about communication skills. Why are you interested in this area of law? Why in St. John's Chambers? Those are sort of questions that you should be so ready. The answers should just roll off your tongue on that. So, and then you can spend time really drilling into the responding to questions that partners or tutors or friends or family or whoever you can rope in to assist, and then spring on you. I've not been great at keeping us to time, so I think we better have a quick chat about pupillage, the end goal, reality versus expectation. Georgina, why don't we start with you?
That's a good question. I'm trying to sort of remember what my expectation was, but what I can say is I think it's very clearly defined into your first 6 and your second 6, and first 6 is pretty nice. I mean, it's really about just listening, and I think at St. John's, I can speak for the family team, like the focus is not on trying to sort of trick you or trip you up at the beginning. It is really on saying, come and shadow people, learn everything you can, listen, absorb. So I think I was with my supervisor and more senior members of chambers at the beginning, and there was no such thing as a silly question, which is always very useful. And then towards the end of my first 6, then I went with the more junior members to sort of see what kind of work I would be doing when I got on my feet. So I think first 6 really was quite pleasant. I don't have any memories of it not being pleasant. I think second 6 was as you would imagine it to be. I mean, there are challenges. It's the first time you're on your feet, but it's also really rewarding. I mean, it's the first time that you're doing the thing that you've been wanting to do for a while. You know, it takes a while to get to that point. So I think it was, yeah, really positive, really enjoyable. And I mean, I think even looking at sort of the cases you would get at the beginning of your second 6 to the end, you can see how much progress you've made yourself just in 6 months. So I think it's something to look forward to and not be too worried about. And my memory was largely positive. So I hope that can reassure people if they think it's a dreadful year. There are things that are tricky about any year, like pupillage, of course, but broadly, I think it was a fairly positive experience.
That's what we like to hear. Beatrice?
I'd echo everything that Georgina said. Something that really struck me throughout my pupillage is just how generous members of chambers are with their time. No 2 days are the same. You will do work with your supervisors, you'll do work with other members of the team, you'll go and see, quite often if people have an interesting case on, they might just send an email around and you'll be able to go and see how that develops. And by the time you get to being on your feet, it sounds daunting at the start of your first 6, but actually we've all had recent conversations that by the time we got to our second 6, we felt ready to do it, and excited to be able to put into practice the things that we had been seeing. And the support doesn't stop there. You are still in constant communication, and everyone is still extremely generous with their time, that you learn so much. And I genuinely just felt very grateful to have the opportunity to be learning what I was. And I should say the support is not just from members of chambers, but also working alongside our clerks like Adam, who we have with us today. So maybe Adam, you can tell us a bit about how the dynamic works together.
I mean, ultimately, I was just typing out an answer to one of the people on the chat, actually. But ultimately, we're a team. We want our barristers to progress, obviously, as quickly as possible and be as successful as they possibly can. We want them to be an asset to the business, but ultimately, it is their practice. So, I mean, the barristers are in effect able to do as much or as little as they want to do once they are qualified and in chambers as a full tenant. But yeah, it's an odd dynamic, but it's one that works and has worked historically. We are we are reliant on each other, and there's a balance, and as long as everyone's willing to work hard and do their absolute best, it tends to work quite well.
It really, yeah, I'd echo, it really is a team. I'm dialing in from chambers now, as are quite a few people on this call. The clerk's room is just outside my door. It's not infrequent, as Adam will know, that I go out and discuss what's going on in my day, what's coming up, how they can help. So the clerks really are there, as are a whole number of support networks that we have, not just for pupils, but also for members of chambers too.
Anybody got anything else to add to that? Otherwise, I think we might have to start bringing things to a close. We've managed to get to some of the questions in the chat, but we've had well over 100 questions. So I'm hoping that generally we've answered in our general discussion many of those questions. It's a tough process, but I think we'd all agree that it's a pretty worthwhile job at the end of it, and one that you can really sort of shape and pursue as you want. I know some people who are absolutely determined to reach silk or become senior judges, and that's their focus, and that's great to see. And there are other people, perhaps more like me, who really enjoy the flexibility of the job, and it's such a challenging, fun job, and it's difficult to think of any other one that I'd be able to fit in around sort of the lifestyle that I want to lead at the same time. And I've got to say that St. John's is something I found with a number of the minis that I did is that I experienced a range of different sort of cultures at different sets. Different sets have different cultures, and you've got to find the place that's the right fit for you. And I knew most of my cohort at St. John's from when I was a pupil at Guildhall up the road, and I'd sort of come over, and it's a very sort of sociable, supportive bunch. And I think that's very important in a job where otherwise you might be left feeling on your own. Sometimes it's sort of your workload and your cases, and not all sets are sort of equally as supportive as others. So if you can find somewhere that's got a good support network, and where you can go and ask more senior bods for their input on tricky areas that you're dealing with in your cases, or just generally chat, I think that counts a lot when you're sort of making long-term decisions about the job. So any closing remarks from people before I waffle on any further? Silence. There we go. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming along. Please do take a few minutes to answer that questionnaire when it pops up at the end of it, and best of luck with your applications in the not so distant future. And thank you to all of the panelists for coming along and giving up your lunch hour before no doubt you go back to a busy day of work. Yeah. Thanks everybody.